Bayonetta.
Bayonetta 3. In a lot of ways, this game to me is a symbolism of my life. This game to me is a representation of how far I've come in my life with everything I've experienced and done. It's also that same symbolism in that it's a heartbreak, a feeling I'm no stranger to. What a sad fucking way to start off the video, sorry. Heart's been broken so many times, I don't know what to believe. Rod wave. That's the dumbest fucking thing I could have ever said. Anyways, Bayonetta 3, ladies and gentlemen, we have fucking done it. We made it to the grand video. I've been wanting to talk about this game, and I finally feel ready to. Originally I made a video on it a few months after launch, but if I'm being honest, it was a pretty shitty video. It wasn't organized like this, I wasn't making these kinds of videos back then, nothing clicked. I felt this game needed a proper video done on it, one like this. I knew it needed to be special, and I think this is the way to do it. In this video, I'll be going over the story of Bayonetta 3, from its reveal to release and the game itself and what makes it so heartbreaking. This one is going to be very long, so I hope you're ready for the time we're going to be having. I do want to preface this by saying that I have videos on Bayonetta 1 and Bayonetta 2 that, while I recommended to watch, aren't required to watch in order to enjoy this video, should you choose to watch this first. Anyways, without further ado, here is the heartbreaking climax known as Bayonetta 3. We need to go back in time to set this picture. 2014. I covered it in detail in the video for Bayonetta 2, but as a mini refresher, the sequel was in limbo for a while. Despite Platinum being well into development, Sega had wanted to go into different business directions and thus stopped developing and publishing new franchises, with Bayonetta being one of those franchises. Just when things were seemingly lost, Nintendo stepped up to finish funding and published the title as an exclusive for the Wii U. Things went great, and Bayonetta 2 released on the Wii U in November 2014 to glowing reviews. In addition to its arrival on Wii U, Bayonetta was also the final character revealed for Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS. Things had never been better for the franchise, though there was undoubtedly some wonder about its future. Nintendo was in the beginning stages of their next console, then named the NX, and there was no doubt a question about whether this was just a one-off deal or if there was a further plan for the Bayonetta franchise as a whole. This doubt would begin to fade as throughout 2017, the now named Nintendo Switch launched and had a dominating first year with a clear new direction behind it. Legendary titles such as Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey came out to incredible reception from fans and critics alike. Additionally, new series like ARMS and Splatoon would either debut or expand themselves further on the Switch platform, giving just a sliver of hope that somewhere within this lineup of games, maybe it was possible for Bayonetta to get her share too. Despite us fans waiting the last 3 years for anything related to Bayonetta beyond Smash Bros., nothing was guaranteed. Neither Platinum or Nintendo had said anything about the future of the franchise beyond Kamiya hoping for a third title. This was all about to change, however, as on the night of December 7th, 2017, the Game Awards took place. This as a whole was a pretty big night for Nintendo. Not only did they have multiple titles in multiple categories, they also won multiple of those awards as well, including Game of the Year, going to Breath of the Wild. 2017 was probably my entire time of living the single greatest year of gaming ever invented. Every company was in their bag. It was fucking incredible. Stellar title after stellar title. Gaming as a whole had never been better, and its future was looking brighter and brighter by the day. Nintendo looked to continue staying at the helm of this bright future, and that was no clearer than a segment featured on the show with an announcer telling the audience to take a look at the screen for a special announcement. The screen goes from showing the Game Awards world premiere to the iconic Nintendo Switch Snap and a familiar looking crescent moon. It was a trailer for Bayonetta 2 coming onto the Switch, in addition to the first game coming in a bundle releasing on February 18th, 2018. This was a pretty great announcement, and I was extremely hyped. By this point, I had established that I was buying any and everything Bayonetta related, so getting this on my favorite console was a no-brainer. However, I mentioned this as a look to the future of gaming, and ports weren't the only thing. Well, for 2018 they kinda were. Nintendo was also looking to show games for the future. Following Jeff Keighley and Reggie Fils-Aimé discussing the reasoning for bringing Bayonetta over to the Switch, Jeff looked to close it out and move on with the show, before being stopped by Reggie saying, "You thought I came all the way up here for only one announcement?" Oh my god. Reggie speaks about how grateful Nintendo was to have Platinum Games on board with the Switch and did a Switch finger snap transitioning into another world premiere trailer. It opens up with another moon and the Platinum logo on screen with a single strand falling out from the sky as the moon turns blood red. From there it transitions to Bayonetta and her appearance from 1 in a fight with some mysterious purple being and her bullets disintegrating. Afterwards it goes to a shot of her standing in front of the camera with the being in the distance and Bayonetta breaking in half, with a 3 on the Bayonetta symbol and text officially stating that Bayonetta 3 is confirmed and being in development exclusively for the Switch. What a damn trailer. The audience going wild in the background, I was going wild in my room watching it. After 3 years of wonder, Bayonetta 3 was confirmed. There was so much to take away from such a small teaser trailer. What happened to Bayonetta? Why was she in her costume from 1? Who or what was that purple being? What was with the bullets and the effects that they had when shooting? There were so many questions, yet so much excitement to see it in its future presentations, and hopefully there wasn't much of a wait. Oh. The trailer for Bayonetta 3's teaser trailer was on December 7th, 2017, and we wouldn't know it at the time, but we as fans would be going through the most painful couple of years imaginable. From December 7th, 2017 to September 2021, there were 14 directs including E3s, minis, and partner showcases, all with no mention of Bayonetta. Direct after direct, you'd watch the full thing thinking it was going to be the final announcement, only to be let down again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Every direct making the same prediction, just hoping for even a sliver of news, and it just never coming were very dark times. It didn't help that Platinum wasn't saying anything either. Every 6 to 8 months or so, Hideki Kamiya would say in an interview that everything was going fine and then leave it at that. It was honestly very concerning and made all of us collectively wonder just what exactly was going on. Just as all hope was seemingly lost forever, at least for me anyways, there was one faithful day that changed everything around. September 23rd, 2021. A 40-minute Nintendo Direct aired in which Nintendo was going over their titles for the rest of the year and looking into 2022. There were a multitude of announcements: NSO expansion, a brand new 3D Kirby title, Splatoon 3 story mode, the damn cast for the Mario movie was revealed at the time. All of these truly great announcements were all being knocked out, leaving one final announcement for the end. Just as the 40 minutes were nearing their end, Yoshiaki Koizumi told viewers that they were showing just one last announcement for the day and to take a look. The second the trailer begins, you notice a sign that reads Platinum to the right of the screen, and suddenly you begin to wonder, what if? The trailer continues and it gets more confusing as to what it is we're looking at, as it looked nothing at all like Bayonetta. There's military men, a green monster looking thing, even the dog mascot from Astral Chain. However, despite seeing all these things, you just couldn't help but wonder, is this Bayonetta? Sometimes long explanations and deep words aren't needed to describe something, only just a visual. There's one clip that supports this, and it's mine.
Hello? Oh, that's fire. The sequel coming out.
No, it's Bayonetta. No, it's Bayonetta.
Wait! Bayo!
It was real. After 4 years of nothing, 4 years of constant disappointment, 4 years of wonder of where the game was at, it was right there. Bayonetta 3 was finally real. There was a lot to unpack, but even before I could start, I'd just get hit with a rush of happiness all over again and go back to rewatch it. Even with the two things I wasn't too keen on being the enemies and the frame rate, I'll get back to both of these later, I was just too excited that I didn't even care about either of them. There was also some mystery behind this trailer too. Who was at the end of that trailer? Though more keen viewers would notice two things maybe most wouldn't. The first was voice acting. Bayonetta's voice was slightly different than her voice in the first two games. It wasn't anything crazy, in fact I didn't even notice it myself till Twitter began searching, but as it turns out, there would be a new voice actor for Bayonetta, Jennifer Hale. No reason was given at the time as to why, but if it was just a natural thing to move on, Jennifer Hale sounded pretty damn good, so I had no issue with it personally. The second thing to note was that end credits section. It showed the producer tags, but on the screen one was missing. Director of 2, Yusuke Hashimoto. Now, majority of the staff was still intact from last time, but no Hashimoto was concerning despite him having left since 2019. This was going to be a different game, and the trailer definitely showed it, even if it was more subtle things. Regardless, over the next year we'd get a steady stream of information, with the release date of October 28th, 2022 on the horizon, and the anticipation could not be any larger. I'd count down the days till the game came out, watching every trailer to pass by the time. Things were going smooth and it seemed like we were in for a great time, one of fun, happy times, and not any slightest bit of controversy. And then it happened. October 15th, 2022. You know, in life there's three things you never ask. You never ask a woman her age, you never ask a man what his salary is, and you never ask a Bayonetta fan what happened on October 15th, 2022. Now for fans of the series, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm referring to, but for new fans or perhaps people who are watching this who aren't familiar with any of this at all, you might be asking me, Mr. Pepe, what exactly happened on this day? I mean, the game hadn't come out yet. Did some massive leak happen? No, that didn't happen, though what did happen was arguably worse, and I will tell you the story, but in order for me to do this, it's best I paint you a picture. Close your eyes. Or actually don't, because I'm gonna have shit on the screen. I woke up on the morning of October 15th, and like any morning, the first thing I did was check Twitter. It's become an integral part of my routine, and it's my source of news. I thought nothing of it. I saw Bayonetta trending, and under it, Helena Taylor. I clicked on it out of curiosity, not even taking into consideration that I could be opening myself up to spoilers, and that's where I was greeted to this.
Hello, my name's Helena Taylor, and I am the voice of Bayonetta, and I would like to explain to you why I didn't voice Bayonetta 3.
The entire video can be found on YouTube if you're curious to get the full experience, but I'll give the summary here. In the video, Taylor explains her absence from Bayonetta 3, accusing Platinum Games of only offering her $4,000 to record the entire game in the process. She decided to not take on the job and urged people not only to stand with voice actors, but more important to the story, to boycott Bayonetta 3. This caused complete chaos within the community, with everyone refreshing their timelines waiting for more news or a statement, literally anything. I'll add in retrospect in a moment, but I was at the time in the minority of people who did not buy into this at all. As for why I didn't believe it, simply it boiled down to me being a fan and not wanting anything to ruin the game. In hindsight, there are a few issues. For starters, one of her first sentences was, "The Bayonetta franchise has made an approximated $450 million. As unfortunate and sad as this sounds, there's no chance in hell that's possible. The first two games combined for 3 million sales at the time. Adding on to that Bayonetta has essentially never been full priced, and that doesn't add up. If we just magically said that the games were both $60, they would have had to have sold 7.5 to 8 million copies without merchandise just to make up that $450 million. One simple Google search can tell you that the games have not sold that many copies, even combined. The second one I feel nobody really points out is Nintendo. I understand that Platinum has majority control over the project, especially with who voices it, but the game does run through Nintendo. At this point in time, it's pretty much locked in that Bayonetta is a Nintendo franchise. I'm not saying that Nintendo is totally perfect in every aspect, nor am I saying that Platinum isn't capable of doing good business practices on their own, but like, come on, man. Of all the gaming companies you hear in the news, they're all bad practices. Mass layoffs, unfair pay, unhappy workers. You don't hear any of this about Nintendo. In fact, you hear the opposite. Instead of mass layoffs, the company is growing with record profits. Employees are being paid and are largely happy. So for Nintendo, I will wave the red banner proudly here and say that they would not let this fly under them. Again, I understand that they aren't fully involved, but they wouldn't let a scandal like this fly under their belt. So when you combine these two together, in addition to what comes next, it begins to become blurred as to what is believable from her. Just as things were at a high, Platinum Games put out a statement and basically said, yeah, no. Taylor would begin being called a liar from fans, and while she fought back, it would begin to become clear that the response would only drown her claims out more. An article from Bloomberg would come out detailing an interesting note. Taylor didn't necessarily lie about the $400,000. Well, Jesus, if she was getting paid that much, I don't know what the fuck I'd do. Taylor didn't necessarily lie about the $4,000. It's just that she lied about how many times she'd be given that amount. The article went on to say that Taylor was offered around $4,000 per session, 5 sessions in total, giving a rough estimate of $15,000 made from the project had she taken it. It was later alleged that the author of the article, Jason Schreier, had seen written evidence of Taylor being offered $15,000 at the least for the role, and that she declined due to asking for 6 figures as well as some royalties for the franchise, which Platinum declined and moved on to other options. After this came out, Helena Taylor would begin to spiral. News would come out about her true colors, such as her beliefs, lies, among other things that mixed in with the responses from Platinum and Bloomberg, causing for people to slowly turn against her. Arguably the biggest nail in the coffin, however, was that after things came out, she began to change her story. She went from the $4,000 in the original story to then suddenly saying that $15,000 was offered. This was definitely the dagger that got people to not believe her, and as a result, her career has never been the same since. End picture. That was the story of Doomsday, and it was arguably the biggest moment of the release, including the reveal itself. While it's not a good thing, there was an oddly fun nature to it all. I remember constantly refreshing my timeline, laughing at all the jokes, while also feeling a sensation of nerves. It was kind of fun, albeit a bad situation. As far as my stance went with the game and the situation, I still kept my pre-order and would wait with excitement each passing day until it released. And then before I knew it, it finally arrived. The day was October 28th, 2022. I had purposely stayed home from school waiting till my mom got off to head to GameStop and pick up my pre-order. I wouldn't speak to anybody for the entirety of playing the game, didn't check any social medias to avoid spoilers. I didn't want anything. Actually, the only thing I did from the 28th to the 31st was go to a basketball game, which is really fucking good by the way, and open up my Ike amiibo I got from eBay, which would begin my amiibo resurgence talk I talk about in my amiibo video. So it's pretty clear that I was locked into beating and focusing on exclusively this game. And the plan was finished on October 31st, Halloween Day. While my mom handed out candy in the neighborhood and my sister was hanging out with her friends, I sat in my room and finished Bayonetta 3 instead of either. And the moment I finished the game, I vividly remember sitting in my room in silence for a few minutes, and then let out a light but toned, "What the fuck?" I let out that reaction because at that very moment, the ending of the game I had waited so many years for, a game that had been a symbolism in my life for the past 5 years or so, I had realized something. I realized that this game was not like any of the other games I've ever played, period. It gave me a feeling that I hadn't ever experienced with something like a video game. Heartbreak. As I mentioned at the start of the video with the rod wave thing, I'm no stranger to heartbreaks. I had actually gone through 2 of them that year already, but this one wasn't like those 2. I had thought that something like a video game couldn't invoke that feeling, but it did. While the other two were absolutely more serious, this one just felt so mind-boggling. I suppose heartbreaks can be different emotions, though that's another subject for a different day. The question here is, why was it a heartbreaking climax? How did they mess up? And what can they do to fix this in the future? These are all questions I'll answer in this video, though I'll be doing things a little bit differently this time. In the videos for the first two games, which I do recommend watching before this one again, blah 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 whatever, I ran through the story, then delved into what made the games good with their gameplay, art, etc. For this video though, I'll be doing everything as we go through the story, both the good and the bad parts. It will make sense as you watch the entire thing, but just as an example, during the opening chapters of the game, I'll speak on the gameplay, music, art, etc. as it correlates with the story beat. Additionally, I'll be giving my thoughts from my memory of playing for my first time, as well as what I feel about it overall now. Anyways, so without further ado, here is the heartbreaking climax known as Bayonetta 3. Bayonetta 3 immediately starts off different from the previous two games. While they both share a universe of light and dark, perception is reality type of thing, you hear a different voice narrating the monologue, and it quickly steers away from that. It plays a cutscene reminiscent of the Game Awards teaser, and it fully shows that this is Bayonetta 1's Cereza, same design and all. We're taken to the shape-shifting battle room where we fight what would be presumed to be the villain of the game, as the monologue from this mysterious voice continues. This room is genuinely really beautiful and was honestly one of the best looking areas in the game. I don't know why I found it so pretty, but it just stuck with me. Anyway, so the gameplay section ends and you're taken to a cutscene that shows Bayonetta getting her ass beat. Like, it was pretty fucking bad, man. It was so bad, in fact, that she actually fucking dies right then and there. It was genuinely one of the most shocking things I had ever seen in a game, but also one of the best opening few minutes of a game I'd ever played. One of my favorite endings ever is the ending of Avengers Infinity War, and it's because of shock value. Shock value is something that can either be done really well in the case of that movie or really awful to get a cheap reaction. Genuine emotion is the target, and this opening moment nails that perfectly. Additionally, here we get a brief introduction to Sigurd, who sacrifices himself for our other character, Viola, though we'll get to learn more about both of them later on in the chapter. The other thing that this opening moment does well is establish a threat immediately. I love both Father Balder and Lopter as villains, but they require build-up and close paying attention to odd beats to fully understand. This mysterious being, which goes by Singularity, immediately gets the notion of, oh shit, this guy's really about it. There's no literature lesson or parental revealings, it's just a straight shot and a fantastic shocking moment, which makes what the actual villain is even more disappointing because they use nothing of note here, but we'll circle back to that point later. Back to the story though, before being killed, Sigurd tells Viola that she knows what she must do, and what that is travel between time and worlds to help in the battle against Singularity. In a sense, our main gimmick of this game is multiverses. Not multiverses, multiverses. Alternate timelines, whatever you want to call it. That plays into a big advantage and a big mistake of the game later on, but it's still early, we're like 2 seconds in, so let's be fair and give it more time here. Fading away into another cutscene, we're in New York, much similar to how we were in the second game, except for it being very clear that this is not that same location, and in fact is one in a different universe. This is immediately evident by a look at our protagonist, Bayonetta, sporting a new hairstyle, new outfit, as well as returning characters Enzo, Rodin, and John, who all also share new makeovers. One thing of note is the voice acting of Jennifer Hale, who does a fantastic job and doesn't ever feel like she's trying too hard. If the transition of voice actors wasn't a worry, it was squashed here, and throughout the game, she nails the role. Anyway, she has Enzo take her to a cruise ship where we come across Viola again, who begs Enzo to take her to see Bayonetta. It's there that the cruise ship is under attack, and in Bayonetta fashion is a chaotic scene. Only this time, what's attacking her is something unlike the previous enemies. These beings are what's called homunculi, which are man-made artificial weapons under control of Singularity. This is where my first two complaints come in. For one, the homunculi themselves. There's just no way to put this without me sounding like a blood and gore weirdo, so I apologize for that. I swear I'm not like that, but what the hell are these things? They're these weird, green, goopy slop creatures, none of which I have any character. With the enemies of previous games, they all had unique designs, character, they're all beautiful designs through and through. Here with the homunculi, they have no sauce at all, and from here on out, the enemies, including the main villain himself, don't match up with the being of Singularity we saw in the opening chapters. Smashing them down and seeing the blood and angels fall, it was cool, but with the homunculi, it's just not as fun, and the lack of design and character really hurt it. I get being in an alternate universe and all that, but I'm not so sure why this one had to be different in terms of good enemy designs and the blood. Again, sorry, I sound like a freak for complaining about this, but I don't know, it's weird in my head too. But I felt this on my first playthrough and I still feel it now, so like, what can you do? I guess that issue isn't so serious, it's a minuscule part, though it sort of ties into the next reason. As for the second issue, the game's fucking ugly, man. So this title was either one of, or was the first title to be made with Platinum's new engine, but there's just something so gross about the game. The models of the characters, the mouth specifically, is just what gets me. It's like animated mush. I don't know how else to say it. It's like they talk through the teeth, but the mouth and cheekbones move so unfluidly with the words they're saying. I don't like it at all. It's not just that. The game is a graphical downgrade from 1 and especially 2. 2 is honestly the best of the 3 games graphically. None of the environments felt shorted despite the hardware it was made for. I'll highlight some good areas throughout the video, but graphically this game just looks terrible. They should have stuck with 2's overall direction both in art and graphics, and I'm not sure what the idea was. But now with that out of the way, we get in turn possibly the biggest positive of the game, the gameplay. Keeping with the tradition of Platinum titles of previous, the gameplay is not shorted here one bit. Everything is still just as smooth as the previous 2 titles, if not better. Witch time returns from the previous title, largely the same as it was in 2, just probably a bit more cleaned up and perfected. But there's 2 new mechanics in the game, being Demon Slave and Demon Masquerade. Demon Slave allows the players to take full control of the summons, giving the player a big advantage over the enemies. Think of it kind of like controlling a massive Gundam, that's the best way I can describe it. Demon Masquerade, on the other hand, allows the players to fuse with the infernal demons and fight the enemies as one. The mechanic is sort of similar to the Umbran Climax in that it's temporary, but offers a massive amount of powers. Both of these gameplay mechanics are incredibly fun and did a really good job at spicing up the gameplay to make it unique without taking away from Mike's Bayonetta. In addition to the 2 new mechanics, they also overhauled how skills and techniques work in the game as well. In Bayonetta 1 and 2, you were able to purchase techniques to offer Bayonetta more combos and skills. An example being the heel slide, or that one move from Smash Bros. You purchase it at the Gates of Hell under the techniques section for 20,000 halos, and it would be permanently unlocked to you thereafter. In Bayonetta 3, however, they made moves such as those and ones linked to your infernal demons available in the form of a skill tree. Using the new currency of orbs/seeds you collect through battling the homunculi and exploration, you'll be able to redeem them for new sets and skills in the tree. As for the halos, those are used specifically for Odon's treasures in the Gates of Hell. Skill trees for me are very hit or miss. There's some games that do them very well, like in Final Fantasy VII Remake, both being a pleasing screen to look at while also being simple enough to not be overwhelming to the player. And then there's other games like Final Fantasy X, which in my opinion has a very confusing and overwhelming skill tree that contributed to me being turned off from playing. Bayonetta 3, however, I think they did a pretty good job, and overall I'd say I prefer the skill tree over purchasing them in the Gates of Hell. While it doesn't have a beautiful screen like Remake, it does show you the tree in a streamlined, simple manner with a gameplay presentation of what you're getting in the corner. It also makes you feel rewarded for continuously playing the game, unlocking new mechanics as you progress throughout the game, something I feel like 1 and 2 didn't really do. It keeps things fresh and offers a rewarding feeling of progression without overwhelming the player. Anyways, gameplay aside, we return back to the story. After a pretty fun battle including the returning Jeanne, you wind up saving her from the wild tsunami of the city, taking her to the Gates of Hell once again with Rodin. This time, however, we aren't making our objective to save Jeanne's soul or anything like that from the second game, as she thankfully wakes up and is able to head to the Gates of Hell with us. Viola returns, somehow getting into the Gates of Hell from the damages outside to explain to us not only who she is, but what's happening around us as well. The Homunculi and Singularity have all been destroying multiple universes, which if all of them collapse, Singularity will assume power of the Trinity of Realities. In order for Singularity to be stopped, Bayonetta, Viola, and Jeanne have to work together, with Bayonetta and Viola going to the island of Thule, which serves as a gateway between the universes and collect these Chaos Gears that will lead them to the Alphaverse, where they can defeat Singularity once and for all. Jeanne, on the other hand, is tasked with finding this universe's version of Sigurd, who is a scientist capable of giving needed information on the multiverses. All 3 characters will have dedicated chapters throughout the game, which I actually really enjoy the concept of, though when we get to the execution of those chapters it wavers in enjoyment. So with our 3 characters set to embark on their journey, we see the Bayonetta 3 logo flash on the screen and our adventure with the game truly begins. When Bayonetta and Viola arrive in Thule, that's where we begin to see our objective unfold. As I mentioned at the start of explaining the story, the game's main gimmick is multiverses, and throughout the game you'll travel to different universes and time periods to collect these Chaos Gears. Each universe has a different Bayonetta whom you'll team up with to help protect their universe. Each Bayonetta variant has a Greek B followed by a number, so I'll explain each one with their locations using this B. The first one you'll encounter is a Bayonetta set in Japan, going by B1. We see a memory of sorts showing B1 watching that universe's Jeanne, also going by B1, dying at the hands of Asperatus, an ally homunculi of Singularity. Afterwards, her infernal demon, I'll put that up on the screen, I don't know how I'm supposed to say that. We'll just call it the Phantom Spider. Anyways, you spent some time with this spider, and honestly the control was a lot of fun. It moves really well and was a blast to just speedrun through the world and climb up on walls, as well as use it in battle. It was honestly my preferred summon the whole game, and I'd use it as much as I could throughout the game. It does get taken from us for a little while, however, so we're back to just Bayonetta, where she encounters this wild beast called Strider, who's important to the plot later, but for now we fight him. One thing I do want to mention as a breakaway from the story is all the boss fights up to this point and afterwards are all really fun. It's typical Bayonetta quality, so I really don't have anything to report on. I'll highlight my favorites when we get to them, but just overall know that the fights are a good time. So after defeating Strider, he runs off and then we encounter this Bayonetta's version of Luca, who retains his personality we all love from the first 2 entries. Before they can really get going, they get stopped by an enemy which we defeat, then cut away to Bayonetta's B1 fighting before taking control of her for a bit in the chapter. However, our journey with her isn't long as we watch her die at the hands of Uniclus. This will also be the other thing with these multiverses, is despite helping protect them and getting the Chaos Gears, we'll also see each world's Bayonetta die in one way or another, and the enemies absorbing their powers in the process. They're pretty cool moments despite the unfortunate circumstances, and it was definitely a different side of the Bayonetta games we haven't seen before. Anyways, before she dies, she tosses us the Ignis Senorane yo-yos before engaging in a wild battle with our Gamora demon versus the enemy that killed B1. It was kinda like a King Kong versus Godzilla battle. It was pretty fun, albeit a bit clunky. With the enemies defeated, we collected our first Chaos Gear and returned to Thule. After that, we take our first look at Jean's chapters. As I mentioned earlier, Jean's objective is to infiltrate a research facility to find Dr. Sigurd. Unlike Bayonetta and Viola's chapters, however, Jean's are completely different in every way. For starters, they call them side chapters, of which there's 4 of them. So the base game has 14 chapters with 4 of these side chapters as well as the prologue. These side chapters are all Jean's, so no other characters interact with these beyond cutscenes, as well as the length of them is roughly around 10 minutes or so. Perhaps the biggest of all changes is the gameplay itself. Unlike Bayonetta's usual hack and slash gameplay, these side chapters go in a completely different direction and are instead a 2D Metroid-like infiltration style gameplay. These side chapters have a bit of differing opinions on them, with some people enjoying them while others hated it, calling it a pace breaker and unfun. As for me, I absolutely loved them, and in all honesty, they were the highlight of the game for me. The presentation of it all is phenomenal as well. They do it in like a stealthy jazz vibe, reminiscent of Cowboy Bebop's intro, even with the intro screen itself. The gameplay was also really enjoyable too and offered a nice break from the usual gameplay. Of course, I'm here to play a Bayonetta game, but if you can offer little breathers of different gameplay styles in between, I'm all for it. The best part is that they never overstay their welcome. So if it's not your thing, they're like 10 minutes max, so it's never a chore to sit through. Think of it kinda like a shooting minigame at the end of each chapter in Bayonetta 1. Different gameplay, quick and easy, never broke up the pace. Each of these chapters are largely the same with the exception of the 4th one, so I'll mention it when it shows up, but I won't deep dive into them beyond story points. But they are a really great time. If there's one definitive highlight of the game for me, it's these side chapters. I did want to highlight a bit of the gameplay of it as well for those who might not be familiar with what I'm saying. The goal of these chapters is to find these elevators to take you to your end zone within a time frame, meaning these segments are all timed. You are allowed to perform physical attacks and do some witch time of your own, though the gameplay is most comparable to that of a Metroid game, shooting enemies from afar and progressing through the map. You can stealth kill the enemies by going through these doors placed throughout the map, or just by shooting and running up to them. Everything felt really snappy and a ton of fun to play, and this is all despite never having played a Metroid game before. If it's anything like this, I think I might have to try Dread finally, but that's another discussion for a different day. Anyway, so after you complete the first side chapter, Chapter 4 returns you to Bayonetta once again, who arrives in Thule to take a portal to their next destination, Ancient China, and at that, meeting our next Bayonetta, who will be called B2. Just as a side note, while I did dog on the designs of a lot of characters, the design of B2, which you thankfully are able to obtain as a costume later, is by far my favorite. I've always loved Imperial Gear period, but specifically this design, they really nailed it out of the park on. I did also enjoy B1's design, but the one thing holding it back was that damn ugly ass yellow lipstick. That shit was hideous to look at. As well, I should mention I really enjoyed the overall design of this location too. It's nothing mind-blowing, I guess you could think of it as like a Bowser's Castle of some sorts, but regardless, I appreciated it. Anywho, so all these alternate universe chapters largely set up the same way, and encountering Bayonetta, that universe, doing whatever objective is needed while trying out the new summon of that world, fight along them or as them before seeing them die and inherit their weapon and demon to defeat the enemy that killed them. I will try to speed up these portions as it all largely follows the same story beat, but of course I'll include anything relevant to the plot, and that's different. So this area's demon is the Dead End Express, which is a train. Honestly, this one was one that grew on me. The controls were a bit confusing at first, but as I got used to it in both of my first playthrough and the subsequent ones, it would wind up being pretty alright. But in most scenarios, I continue to use the spider. Along the way in your journey in Ancient China, you link up with Viola once again, the first time you see her since the initial split in Thule. Now this is where my biggest negative of the game comes in. It's not the boss fight that you do teaming with Viola, that was good fun, but it's an issue that plagues the game in every other way. Future chapters, the story, the pacing, etc. Everything I can encapsulate into one reason why I think this game failed begins here, and that reason is one character, Viola. Okay, so Viola, I want to have a talk about her. I do not like this character even slightly. I fully believe Viola is the biggest thing responsible for this game's downfall, and I'll explain most of it here and some throughout when appropriate. The thing with Viola is her as a character fucking sucks. I don't just mean her design, which I already feel is cheap and uninspired, but her writing doesn't present her as being likable. In order for the ending to feel rewarding given how massive it is, they need to set up Viola to be a character that's likable, which they didn't do. In the beginning, Viola is presented as a hothead who's brash, blunt, childish, clumsy, and sensitive. To combat this, she's also cheerful and offers a burst of energy, but none of this works both with her being likable and the contrast with the characters around her. Viola doesn't come off as likable because of her charm of being a hothead and clumsy, it comes off as annoying. She's like an angsty teen who doesn't change or grow throughout the story. The cheerfulness and energy again don't come off as likable, they come off as insincere and like the weird kids you'd avoid when growing up. This also doesn't work with the characters around her, notably Bayonetta and Luca. Of course they'd mock her at the start as one she just kinda shows up uninvited, but also in the nature of her character making mistakes. That in itself is expected, but also equally as expected to change over time, which it really doesn't, at least not naturally and deservingly. Again, she comes off as an angsty teen cornball and it just doesn't get you invested. The majority of the game has Viola running, chasing something, which feels like a way of saying, hey, you're not worth my time, I don't want to be around you. Her chapters, which we'll cover shortly here, are pace breakers, not just because of her as a character, but her gameplay as well, which I'll get to when we get there. The biggest thing with her writing is I'm not sure how they fumbled making her likable when they already did this once before with Loki. Loki is the perfect counter argument to someone who likes Viola as a character. Not saying your opinion is wrong for liking her, but just let me cook here. In Bayonetta 2, when you first meet Loki, he comes off as naive and cocky. Somebody who doesn't need help but then runs to you for help when things go wrong. But it was throughout the story, watching his relationship with Bayonetta grow, seeing them learn to respect and care for one another, that's what made him a good character. He felt rewarding. He had an objective that you, the player, wanted him to get to, which was the mountain and ultimately stopping Lopter. When you get to the end of the game and watch that dynamic of Bayonetta and Loki, you as the player feel rewarded and happy seeing how far they came. Bayonetta made fun of him and teased him, but it went from going from a comeback to being out of a place of sincerity and love. Loki was the perfect character to fit this trope, so it's not like they couldn't have done it again with Viola, but how they present her at the start to the end is nothing like Loki's, and they just shat the bed with it. At that 2, where the hell was Loki in this game? At the end of 2, he says he'll take a break and return when ready, followed by the Fool card, insinuating he's returning sooner rather than later. But in 3, no mention. There's no version of himself, there's nothing he assumes the role of in 3, literally nothing. Where the hell did he go? Anyways, that was just the first part of Viola's issues, but to get to the next part, we're gonna have to continue on with the story. So after defeating the boss, Luca joins you two from out of nowhere, who Viola somehow recognizes. Luca has some sort of headache when he sees her, kinda like Cloud in Final Fantasy VII Remake, and runs off, to which Bayonetta suggests Viola runs after. After she leaves, it's you as Viola, finally getting to the third chapter type I mentioned, the Viola chapters. These in turn are also my next issue with her. To me, these are the pace breakers of the game, not the Jean chapters. When I got to the Jean chapter or Bayonetta one, I was excited. When I got to a Viola chapter, I was eager to rush through them just so I didn't have to play them, only to be relieved when they were done and I returned to the other two chapters. Now my issues with Viola so far have been the character itself, but that's just one element, and perhaps the gameplay itself is fun. It's not fun. I do need to preface this by saying that I played when the game first came out and the patch for Viola wasn't available till the revisit, and in all fairness they did clean up some things for Viola. Before the patch she was straight up awful to play as, with now, I mean, it's alright. The biggest thing with Viola is witch time. With Bayonetta, you just press it at the right time when they swing and it will activate. Good and simple. With Viola, it works a little bit differently in that instead of that, it requires a parry to activate. Again, it's not really bad, and worst case scenario, you can just spam Cheshire, which is her demon, and in any other game's case, it would be fine. But in a Bayonetta game, it serves as a massive pace breaker and ruins the fluidity. Using a sword really isn't all too fun either. They had swords in the previous games, but with it being Bayonetta, you were a lot more loose and could hit from afar and have it be fun. With Viola, it kinda requires you to dash up close to them and attack, which just isn't fun and doesn't eliminate the enemies as fast. One positive I do want to mention is that her traversal around areas not in combat is actually really fun. The zipline and her overall movement speed feels really good, and I wouldn't mind seeing it used for Bayonetta in another game. But then as for her objective of these chapters, it boils down to chasing after Luca. There's nothing else really to them, which I mentioned earlier how this doesn't help our character out, but as a gameplay element it can be redundant. Anyways, to close out, she tries to find Luca but ends up getting attacked by Strider before being put in a battle to close out her first chapter. Returning to Bayonetta's side, in chapter 6 it follows the same story as the last universe and the future ones of seeing that world's Bayonetta die, though this one includes a really fun rail shooter with the train as well as a boss battle at the end with Madame Butterfly before going into Jean's second side chapter, which does include some nice dialogue between Jean and Viola. It was actually probably the only time I enjoyed Viola's dialogue, but it didn't last long as the next chapter is all her and oh my god, this was the worst chapter in the whole game. I'd even go as far as to say this might be the worst chapter in Bayonetta's history. It's largely a desert, which means you're slow walking and heat exhaustion, so everything is slowed down even further. I shit you not, there's a half cutscene, half gameplay segment that lasts like 3 minutes and it's just her slow walking. On top of that, add that it's a desert, so everything is bland and not much to go off of on where to go. If you're not fully attentive, it might take you a lot longer to get where you're supposed to go. Then on top of that, there's an entire verse dedicated to you finding water, which the game doesn't really explain well either, so it's slow walking even with treasure still. That's what I mean by pace breaking, and this was easily her worst chapter, though it does give us some story detail. Up to this point, the story notes have been Bayonetta traveling and getting the gears, Jean finding Sigurd, and now Viola chasing Luca. We finally get somewhere with chasing Luca as it's revealed that these headaches have been affecting him and he has been Strider the whole time. He becomes Strider due to the multiple versions of him in the other universes dying, which causes him to become Strider due to rage from the Alphaverse's version of Luca, which is called Dark Adam. It's an okay story point, at least it gives Luca somewhat of importance for once, but it still doesn't really help Viola's case much to better her as a character. Anyways, after fighting Strider and some talks with Bayonetta, you guys agree to continue on with Bayonetta getting the Chaos Gears and Viola going to find Luca. Now Strider, as the game cuts to another Bayonetta chapter. Still in the Sand World, we learn that it's set in ancient Egypt, as well as get a look at our next Bayonetta, B3. I also really enjoy her design here, though I do love ancient Egyptian art and designs as is, so that was probably an easy sell for me. Like the first two, these two follow largely the same story points, so I won't go over that. Just know that it's the same setup with this universe's Bayonetta dying. The demon this time around is a singing frog, which is as ridiculous as it sounds, but also as fun as it sounds too. It also included a fun flying section, sorta similar to the jet section in Bayonetta 2. We also get to see this universe's Jean, who's actually the ruler slash leader of the area, so we see a lot more of her, which is actually really nice. The only difference is how this universe's Bayonetta dies, instead sacrificing herself to a black hole of sorts over being crushed by the enemies, so that was also a nice change. After our third Jean chapter, which sees her just get to Dr. Sigurd's office before cutting away to another Viola chapter, this one sees her traverse through some lands before encountering a variation of Luca known as Lucon, who is the prince of the fairies and has knowledge of the multiverses. Viola gets transported to France, which was by far my favorite looking part of the game. I really enjoy the city of Paris in the game, especially with it lit up at night, and the accompanying music, which as a side note, I should mention the music in this game has been really good. Not quite my favorite soundtrack of the 3 games, but still really good. The chapters ends with Oh shit, I have to take out the trash. The chapter ends with another fight with Strider, who knocks Viola off of a cliff before transitioning into the next chapter with Bayonetta, who is now also in France. After a fun cutscene with Bayonetta and Enzo, who's some inspector detective kind of guy, it again follows the same story beats as the other 3, except for this time you are the one who kills the Bayonetta in this universe, as well as kill a variant of your mother, Rosa. This all goes into the 4th and final side chapter of the game, which sees Jean and Dr. Sigurd leave the research facility in a fun shooter segment. It plays an end credit scene signaling the end, but it really isn't the end of the game, just of these chapters. Okay, I want to take a break just before we get to the final 2 chapters of the game. There's a lot of story that unfolds here, and a lot of it is a head scratcher, so thank you for making it this far into the video. I don't have any sponsors or anything fancy like that, and I'll save the whole if you like the video, sub, whatever thing for the end. So, just as a little break, I recently got another tattoo from Bayonetta. It's the Aesir story mural. I'll have a picture of it, or a video on screen. It's pretty neat, I think. Okay, back to the story. Closing in on our final 2 chapters starts off with Jean and Dr. Sigurd meeting up with Bayonetta and Viola back in Thule, who then is able to open up the portal to the Alphaverse using the Chaos Gears. Bayonetta and Jean split up to fight, with Bayonetta partaking in an incredible boss battle with a homunculi called Ariel, something like that. Afterwards, Bayonetta gets to fight Strider, who appears to have killed her, but I guess Umbran Witch magic or something heals her, right, when she gets stabbed by him, so I guess it's fine. After the cutscene, Bayonetta fights Strider in another amazing boss battle, ultimately defeating Strider with Lucon and Viola showing up to the spot as well. After this battle, it's revealed that Dr. Sigurd has opened up the Alphaverse, but at that was revealed to be a setup by Singularity, who would have guessed it. So as it turns out, Singularity takes control of Sigurd in the Alphaverse, who is an artificial human seeking power over the universe. Then probably one of the worst things ever happens, which I'm still salty to this day about. Sigurd, now known as Singularity, kills Jean. This is the point of no return in the story, so I'll dissect and discuss as we move, and this choice was fucking stupid. It's dumb for 2 reasons. 1, why kill off Jean? It felt like a very pointless death and just for cheap shock value. There wasn't any reason to kill off Jean, nor does it make Singularity and Sigurd feel important. Deaths in media should make sense, and this is a case where it doesn't. If I use something like Final Fantasy VII for example, look at how they did President Shinra. He was a semi-important figure, but not one to base a whole game off of, and served to make Sephiroth look strong. If you wanted a major important character death, look at something like Avengers with Tony Stark, though for this point to San we'll forget about him being Dr. Doom or whatever. He goes out a hero, making that sacrifice, and while heartbreaking, serves a fitting end. One example was to present the villain strong, while the latter was to have a fitting end to a major character. Something this death does neither of. The second reason why it makes no sense is how she died. She got stabbed in the chest just like Bayonetta did with Strider, yet she didn't die, but Jean does. I understand power scaling and Sigurd having to be the main villain and whatnot, but the same action killing one while seemingly not affecting the other when both Bayonetta and Jean are Umbran witches with similar powers doesn't make any sense. Anyway, so with that fading out, we are in the game's last chapter, and this is where everything truly blows up, so again, stay with me here. So with Sigurd opening up the Alphaverse, Bayonetta, Viola, and Lucon stand just by it, unable to get in. Lucon is able to restore Luca back to his original self from Strider. Yes, Lucon and Luca are two different characters. Lucon does this by having all the Arc Atoms come together to become Arc Atom Origin, or just regular looking Luca. For anyone just as confused as I was, each Luca in the different universe is an Arc Atom. So when I say that from here on out, it's referring to Luca or any other Luca that's not Lucon. Anyway, so along with this, he now also has the power to control Strider, which he turns into to jump into the Alphaverse, also allowing Bayonetta and Viola to jump in as well. Returning to Bayonetta, you're put in Manhattan, where the death of the first Bayonetta was at the beginning of the game. You encounter Dr. Sigurd after like 2 seconds of walking, who goes on to W as Arc Eve Origin. And if you put the two together by now, Bayonetta is Eve, Luca is Adam, Adam and Eve. Wow, who would have fucking thought? Sigurd transforms into what's known as Singularity Chaos, while Bayonetta summons Gamora, and it's another King Kong Godzilla fight from earlier in the game. Still fun, albeit a bit clunky like the first go around. After defeating it, you summon Madame Butterfly to hit a Kamehameha on Chaos that sends it and Sigurd into the moon, who Bayonetta chases after. Upon reaching the moon, you're next faced with Singularity Balance, who design-wise is similar to Father Baldur from the first game. I want you to try and keep track of how many battles we fight in this ending chapter. Right now we're at 2, but actually we're at 3 because we fight Singularity Balance twice before he finally starts to lose power. As a result of this, he gets all the previous souls of the Bayonettas and Jean's freed, fighting alongside you now. This includes Jean from our universe only temporarily though, as she returns back to his soul, so she's still dead unfortunately. Returning to Manhattan, we face Singularity Definition now, our 4th boss battle this chapter, who ends up whooping our ass, and we face a similar cutscene to the opening one, with Bayonetta about to die and Viola, who just now shows up, watching in the background. She attempts to fight Singularity but gets stopped and held up just like Bayonetta, both defenseless and about to die. Just as Bayonetta is about to die, this cutscene happens.
You didn't cry while I was gone, did you? Women of our caliber don't need invitations, darling. Right.
In a legendary fan service moment, Bayonetta from the first game and Bayonetta from the second game arrived to help save the day. It was honestly such a cool moment that I didn't see coming, but I'm really glad they did this. It's a Multiverse's storyline, so you could probably figure it would happen, but it doesn't take away from the excitement of seeing them appear not one bit. As far as how they got brought in, it doesn't really explain that well, as Sigurd says he destroyed their universes long ago, but off of assumption and the brief dialogue here, it's inferred that since the events of how it originally played out got altered by jumping into the Alphaverse, it I guess can either undo the previous events or will alter them, allowing the two Bayonettas to show up. After a quick battle with the two Bayonettas, it still isn't enough, as both of them and Viola all get bitched by Singularity, leaving our Bayonetta as the only one left fighting. Using what power they did have, however, the two Bayonettas combine with a third to make one ultimate Bayonetta of sorts. After another battle, which by this point you're like damn how many more, out of nowhere, Luca returns and saves us from death once more, who we fight alongside with in another cool fan service moment. After this, we finally defeat Singularity after 1,000 battles with him, or if you were counting, this should be 7. This defeat of Singularity causes the multiverses to be restored, but at the cost of a broken and wounded Bayonetta, who loses control over Demon Gamora and gets the soul quite literally knocked out of her. Luca used one final rush to defeat Gamora, and in quite possibly the best ending ever, is together with Bayonetta and they kiss down to hell. If that was the true ending of the game, that would have been perfect. Maybe the journey to getting there wasn't perfect, but the ending of those two, the two characters who despite being alternate versions of, we've grown watching for the last decade plus, riding off into the sunset together as lovers, that would have been the perfect ending. And then the second Doomsday happened. Okay, so one thing I purposely left out until now was this. Viola is the daughter of Bayonetta and Luca. Throughout the game, there's subtle hints of them being her parents, but it's not outright confirmed until Bayonetta and Luca go into hell, where she fully calls them mom and dad. I suppose that's whatever. Do I think she's even deserving of that? No, not really. Her character doesn't really fit them outside of Luca's clumsiness, and I mean, if we really want to go deep, where the hell does the blonde hair even come from? I'm no scientist, but I do remember how DNA charts work from school. Something isn't adding up here. I'm playing, but I really don't see any of Bayonetta and Viola, but hey, whatever, what can I do, right? It's not a game-shattering conclusion necessarily, and to some with an outside perspective, it may even be a predictable one. Then it's what happens after the credits roll that makes it heartbreaking. After the credits roll, Viola is in some other world when something similar looking to Bayonetta appears out of the ground to attack Viola. This is sort of Bayonetta, but instead it's called Dark Eve, the Alphaverse's counterpart to Bayonetta. According to the Bayonetta character archives, Dark Eve stems from the Alphaverse and was originally that world's Arc Eve, but got defeated in the process of trying to stop Singularity. She barely gained consciousness, but due to the universe's collapsing, merged and thus became Dark Eve, who attacks everything put into sight in the Alphaverse. Or in short, she's evil Bayonetta. Okay, so we fight her in what is the 8th and true final boss of the game, not including any post-game stuff. After the battle, Bayonetta shows up to slash Dark Eve and says that Viola should be given a new name in honor of growing so much, to which she mouths it, but due to the game's models, it deadass is near impossible to catch on the first glimpse, so we'll act like it's not known to us yet. With this though, our hearts races just a little bit, just wondering if maybe they were really going to do what we hoped they wouldn't do. And then they did. Returning to Manhattan and the Gates of Hell, a cutscene plays with Rodin, Enzo, and Viola. After some pretty fun dialogue, we come to find out that post the events we just talked about, Viola is studying at school in Manhattan while also taking on jobs from Rodin. Before she goes out for one of these jobs, Rodin says the most devastating line followed by devastating screen ever.
Shit, my bad. Forgot to use the family name. Be back by curfew. Bayonetta.
Okay. Let's dance, baby!
Okay, so just to recap it in case you had the same reaction of shock as I did, Viola is now deemed Bayonetta, and if the end title screen is to be believed, if the Bayonetta series returns, it will be her who is Bayonetta, not Cereza. If I'm being a bit dramatic, I apologize, but that is genuinely so fucking bad. Continuing with the point of Viola being the worst part of the game, this is the climax of that. The two biggest questions are what and why. Why would they make Viola Bayonetta? Viola did absolutely nothing to even come close to proving herself worthy of that title, and on top of that replacing Cereza? There's only one Bayonetta and it will be Cereza. You can't have Viola become Bayonetta because it just doesn't make any sense. She's quite literally a nepo baby hire, that's simply how to put it. They do nothing to make her even a likable character, she has no fun gameplay to make it tolerable, and they ended off by not only making her something she shouldn't be, but as well still not making her that likable character to even attempt to replace? It's plain and simple awful and genuinely felt shocking that they do that. Viola truly is the game's worst flaw and broke almost everything with it. I know this video has been all shit on Viola and honestly I stand my ground, she's awful. But to give credit is to give credit, and I will say that she has some moments of shine. The two examples that come up to me is in the side chapter with Jean, where they share some dialogue, as well as the final cutscene with Rodin before he said the Bayonetta line. Those were actually good moments. Whether it was her giving information in the Jean segment or flashing some potential character growth in the end scene, I don't think Viola could be a completely lost cause. I want her to be, and I don't want her to return ever again, but if that's the direction they go on, if they write more like that, then I don't think she'd be a half-bad character. However, it was the continuous big moments they gave her that felt undeserved and undelivered that ruined any chance she had. They wrote her character horribly, making her come off incredibly unlikable. Mixing it with some unfun gameplay and an ending that is bound to be the wrong choice, Viola is truly what I'd consider to be the biggest reason behind the game's heartbreaking tale. With this though, I feel like I should do two things. For one, I wanted to share my full summarized thoughts on Bayonetta 3. It's such a hard game to speak on because the game carries a lot of importance in my heart. This was a game I waited years on. In a lot of ways, it felt like a symbolism for all those years. It was something I had always hoped for but never got. Then when it finally came out, it was just genuinely heartbreaking. Art that is prolonged has high expectation, and with that comes a level of pressure. That pressure is so high that oftentimes it's hard to look at something as a piece and more as a talking point. For any music listeners out there, take Frank Ocean as an example. His last album was in 2016 and was so good along with his first album that a third would be almost impossible to match. He still hasn't dropped that album, and while I don't want to speak for him because, well, I'm not him, if I had any guess on one reason as to why he hasn't, I'd say matching up to that level of performance and the reception of the people is one of them. It boxes you into a bubble when you want to try new things, and I understand that. The thing with this though is that you can try new things while sticking to what works. Climax. If you want a video game example, the Final Fantasy VII Remake series. They kept the core story and iconic characters intact, which allowed them to try new things in both story and gameplay. So with Bayonetta 3, that's where it gets so frustrating and sad. The gameplay is at its peak here, no doubt about that. They somehow found a way to make it even better, whether it was with new mechanics or quality of life improvements. However, what they failed in was the story. The graphics is one thing and definitely an issue, but specifically the story was the dagger in the game. They created an issue with the multiverse gimmick. They introduced a very unlikable protagonist to give them the title of the one character we have been in love with for a decade plus, add on top of that a boring villain and all other side stories that either felt not developed enough or hindered the experience. I use Viola as the primed example for the game's failure because I feel she's what the story revolved around, but truly as an entire look of it is the story overall that really was what ruined the game. It's just that Viola was the main ruining factor of the story. So with that out of the way, there's one thing left to discuss. How can they fix it? Is it even possible to correct something so damaged? My answer to that is despite everything bad I mentioned how much the game served as a heartbreaking climax, yes, I believe it can be fixed. In fact, I think there are multiple ways you can fix this, ranging from easy but lame to difficult but more interesting. At the time of me finishing this script, it's December 21st. I know, I'm sorry, I've been working on this for like 2 fucking months now. At this current point in time, Platinum Games is in some tough waters. A lot of key developers who became studio icons left the team. Kamiya, who is the series creator, left to open up a new studio and returned working with Capcom on the sequel to Okami. He hasn't said very many good things about the studio as of late, saying how his creativity would have died had he continued to stay there, as well as how his visions for the franchise will probably go to the grave with him. Additionally, many key developers have left the studio, including Yusuke Hashimoto, as I mentioned earlier, who was the creator of Bayonetta 2. Add on to that their recent games Babylon's Fall, which was shut down after a year, as well as Scalebound, which got cancelled. The company isn't doing too hot, and the direction they seem to be going in may only get worse. So for this scenario, let's just say that there will absolutely be a Bayonetta 4. Whether Platinum is doing it, Nintendo fully buys the rights, Sega fully buys the rights, the original dev team can get back together, I don't really care. Those are probably all really important discussions to have, but for now let's just keep it simple and say that there will be a Bayonetta 4 no matter what. That means our main issue is how to fix the story. I think there's 3 ways that they can go about doing it. The first fix is arguably the easiest while also being the most lame, and that is the multiverses. The thing with creating these multiverses stories is that they present you with a cop-out in case it doesn't work. Seeing as this isn't the universe people like, they don't have to continue to use it. They can either just discard it and move on to something new, or return to the old one people enjoyed. Multiverse stories aren't my favorite in the world, as I feel like they're doing too much, but the presented benefit is nice to have. So for the first way they can fix it, they just flat out don't have to acknowledge it as it was just another universe. They can focus on the original Bayonetta, the Bayo 2 version, or even try something else. This would also in turn eliminate Viola, Singularity, and any other characters not liked, as again, this is just a different universe, it doesn't matter. That however runs the risk of being boring and making Bayonetta 3 as a game feel completely irrelevant. That's where option 2 comes in, taking out Viola. Now saying they should kill her off is honestly a bit too much, but as I'm sure you're well aware, I think the issue of the game runs through Viola as a character from its start to its ending. They're in a bad spot now where Viola is being presented as the next Bayonetta, and people are not going to like that. So you can bypass this by taking out Viola and finding some way to bring back Cereza. Maybe have an enemy who kills off Viola and somehow we get Cereza. I'm not sure how they want to go about doing that, but this is a way to bypass this. We can return to Cereza as it should be, and we wouldn't have to worry about Viola. Except there is one slight issue with this. Despite me not liking Viola, they've already invested a lot of resource into her. After all, they herald her as the next Bayonetta, a character who for 2 games was immune to dying. She survived gods, a ruthless Lumen Sage father, among countless other things. Did they really want to kill off a character that they invested so much time into that carries that legendary name just because I and maybe other fans want them to? If the first reason made Bayonetta 3 irrelevant, this one makes Viola irrelevant. It's not out of the realm of possibility, as they kinda made Loki irrelevant by not including him in 3, but still. That's where there's the third and easily the most interesting idea comes in. I thought Bayonetta's send-off prior to Viola's name take was perfect. Her going into Inferno with her lover was honestly beautiful. However, with this issue on our hands, we might have to undo that, but I think it could possibly be done even better. In this scenario, the team wants to keep Viola. They've done too much investing and they feel they cannot go on without having Viola, and that's fine. Instead, they should do a God of War-esque game with Bayonetta and Viola. What I mean by this is have Viola go under the wings of Bayonetta fully. Have this be a Kratos and Atreus scenario where Cereza can be the main character, but can also properly develop Viola into a good character. They can rework her personality and have her grow into a strong, worthy character. That would by far be the most interesting way to go about this, and would be the best chance they have at cleaning it up. The best part is all this could be manageable. In Bayonetta 2, Jean's soul gets dragged to Inferno where we have to save it. I'd imagine we can do the exact same thing for Bayonetta as Viola. Have Rodin take us there and have Viola go through a challenge that grows her character early out in the game, but still requires the help of others, in this case Rodin or Bayonetta, and it will continue to get that help until the end of the game where she's ready. As for which scenario I choose, I think all of them have strong pros and cons. The multiverses thing allows you to have a fresh start, though at the risk of making 3 feel irrelevant. Killing off Viola or removing her solves the story's main issue, at the cost of making her become irrelevant and possibly staying the Bayonetta name. And as for the last scenario, you can have a significantly much more interesting game and storyline, but it draws the risk of too much work being put in to make a character people don't already care for likable. It may not work and would again be a waste of time. I guess if I had to choose one, I'd go with the first scenario, as it allows for a clean slate and we wouldn't have to worry about any storylines just because it's multiverses, we don't have to. However, I think the third option is way more interesting and I'd want to see that the most. Anyways, that was the end of the video. Truly, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the video. This was by far the most work I've ever put into a video so far. So if you enjoyed it, please let me know and hopefully you'll stick around for others. Additionally, I want to know how you feel about Bayonetta 3, the series as a whole, and if given the option, how would you fix the story if you felt it needed it? I only thought of 3 things, but there's a lot more ideas out there than I could come up with, so I'd love to hear them. I do have a video on the first and another on the second game in the series, and when I feel ready for it, I'll do one on Origins as well. So if you haven't seen those, I'd highly recommend them. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.